Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be checking out the slow motion capabilities of the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. How well does it work? Well, we're going to have some fun and we're going to find out. So this is a follow-up to a review that I recently posted on the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. And in today's video, what we plan to do is to go into more detail on the slow motion recording capabilities of the Pocket 3. Now, initially I thought this would be a fairly quick video, but it turns out there's quite a lot more to this topic than I initially imagined. So I'm going to break the video up into chapters and I'll post them up here. They should also be available on the video timeline so you can skip to the section or sections you are most interested in. Before we get into it, the usual disclaimer: this video is not sponsored or paid for in any way. All of the equipment was purchased with my own money and the opinions are entirely my own. And of course, if you enjoy today's video and get some good information out of it, please remember to give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more content on tech, travel and leisure. Okay, so let's start out by discussing what the slow motion mode is, how it works, and how it is different from the standard video mode on the Pocket 3. So on my Pocket 3, if I'm recording in standard video mode, I can select from a number of different frame rates, starting at 24 frames per second and going all the way up to 60 frames per second. Now, like many people, I produce my videos and generally record my videos in 30 frames per second. But let's assume I want to capture some nice, smooth, cinematic type footage. So in order to do that, what I might do is record my video in 60 frames per second and then slow it down to 30 frames per second in my video editor. Now, a lot of this is going to be very obvious, but bear with me for a second here. So let's assume I select 4K 60 frames per second on the Pocket 3 and then I record a 10-second clip. What the Pocket 3 then does is it will create an MP4 file on my memory card which is 10 seconds in duration and 60 frames per second. I then load that file into my video editor and I apply a speed factor of 0.5 to it, and what I end up with then is a 20-second clip, 30 frames per second and half normal speed. Now, the slow motion mode works in a completely different way. Let's assume I place the Pocket 3 into the slow motion mode and I select 4x 120. 120 of course being 120 frames per second. And then I record a 10-second clip. Now on my memory card, instead of now getting a 10-second clip at 120 frames per second, what I get is a 40-second clip at 30 frames per second. So the Pocket 3 is actually doing the slowdown editing for me, slowing my video down by a factor of 4, hence the 4x. Now, for those of you who typically produce your videos at 25 frames per second, the DJI offers an additional option for 4K, which is 4x 100. If we use the same example, if we record at 4x 100 for 10 seconds, what we end up with is a 40-second file at 25 frames per second. Now, for those of you who record in 24 frames per second, the DJI currently does not offer an in-camera slow-mo mode that will render in 24 frames per second, so you would need to use one of the other modes and then slow the video down in your video editor. For example, if you use the 4x 120 mode and recorded for 10 seconds, you could then take the resulting 40-second, 30 frames per second clip, slow it down by 20% and end up with a 50-second clip at 24 frames per second, which would of course then have a 1/5 times slow motion speed. Now, if you record at any other resolution than 4K, you'll find that the Pocket 3 only supports 30 frames per second output. At 2.7K, the only option is 4x 120. And if you record at 1080p resolution, you can choose between 4x 120 and 8x 240, being 240 frames per second. So if we take that same example here, your 10-second recording at 8x 240 would result in an 80-second file at 30 frames per second and 1/8 speed. So what else do we need to know about using the slow motion mode? Well, firstly, there is one limitation, and that is that face and subject tracking does not work when you're in the slow motion mode, which is a shame because that would be a really nice feature to have, and hopefully that will come as a later firmware upgrade. Second point I want to make here is you really need good lighting in order to get good results from slow motion mode. If you think about it, you're recording at 100, 120, even 240 frames per second. And if you're recording at 240 frames per second, that means for each frame, your shutter can only be open for a maximum of 1/240th of a second. So not a lot of light is getting through to your sensor. Now, the camera can easily set a fast shutter speed like that, but if you don't have enough light, the way it will do that is by raising your ISO. And if the ISO gets too high, let's say much above 600, 800, something like that, you will start to see some significant noise in your resulting video clips. One other note regarding the use of the slow motion mode is audio. Now, for some reason, and I'm struggling to understand it, when you use slow motion mode on the Pocket 3, it does record audio, but instead of embedding it into the video file as you would with the standard video, it records it as a separate file and it records it in standard speed. So if we take that same example we discussed earlier, your 10-second clip at 4x 120 will result in a 40-second video clip at 1/4 speed and a 10-second audio clip at normal speed. Now, I'm not sure why DJI decided to do it that way, whether it's a physical limitation, but it certainly makes the synchronization of an audio and video clip much more difficult if you're trying to play around with some kind of slow motion effect. Okay, so let's get set up for some slow motion work. Now, what I'm doing right now can be done either on the camera or through the app. I'm just going to be using the app so I can share what I'm doing with you. So the first thing I'm going to do is place it into slow motion mode. You'll notice it says slow 4x on the screen. And over here on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see this is where I can select what resolution and what frame rate. So I have 1080p, 2.7K or 4K, and if I'm in 4K I can only choose between 100 or 120 frames per second. If I go to 1080p resolution, you'll see I can choose between 120 or 240 frames per second. So let's start out with 4K at 120 frames per second. And here you can see what I mean at the bottom of the screen when it comes to the ISO. So it's starting to get a little bit darker here. The sun is going down over there. And you can see I have a 120th of a second shutter speed and my ISO is around about 250, which is still okay. Obviously, when we go to 1080p and put it in a 240 frames per second, you can see now I have a 1/240th of a second shutter speed, and the ISO is now 510, so significantly higher. Again, I probably waited a little bit too long today, but still we should be able to get some reasonable results at 510 ISO. Okay, so I'm going to go get my helper, and let's have some fun. So, what did you think of the slow motion clips? From my perspective, clearly you can see the sacrifice in image quality going from the 4x at 4K resolution to the 8x at 1080p resolution, but I still think the 8x 1080p results were very usable. But what did you guys think? Please, by all means, place your comments into the comment section. I always love to hear from you. So that's a wrap for today. I hope you enjoyed the video and got good information out of it. If so, please remember to give us a thumbs up and also consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more content on tech, travel, and leisure. Thank you for watching.